I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. A lot of you people wonder where we get our guests and how we get so many interesting guests on this show. Well, more often than not, the guests call us. Today's show, for example, is about shadows on the wolf. A lady named Arlene Van Straten called me and said, "Do you know anything about that volunteer organization, Shadows on the Wolf, and all the great things that they're doing?" And I said, "Well, I've heard about them, but I don't know much about them." Well, she said, "You better call my son and get him on the show, and you're going to learn a lot about what's being done for the wolf in a particular area close to Straten and what might be useful in other organizations in other rivers and other areas." And so I did, and we've got some interesting guests today who are all volunteers. They're not getting paid by the government or any industry. They're volunteering their time and their money and their efforts to do wonderful things, and we're all benefiting from that. Our first guest is Denny Conradt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about how Shadows on the Wolf got started.
Well, George, in 1991, we were thinking about some kind of an organization to try to get somebody's project, fundraiser, I should say, for some of these projects around on the river, being that being a farming community, a lot of these farmers, in order to farm their land, they put dikes up, but what that did was raise a little havoc with the walleye habitat. So what we'd like to do at that time was going to put some culverts in and some what we call tin whistles, is more or less just to control the water level in the marshes. But we sent out, I think there was maybe 8-10 of us that one given evening in January or December in 91. Why don't we send out some letters to some interested sportsmen and see if they would be interested in forming this club or joining us, and So we did, and we all threw $20 in for postage and envelopes and that. And ever since that time, and we had our first banquet, I should say, in 92, in March, and we made $19,000 that evening. And boy, we thought that was big bucks, But as all of us know around Straten now, that was not. It just steadily increased every year. We went from 19,000 that first year in 92 to our last banquet, which was just a couple of weeks ago in March, 2004, 47,900 in one evening.
In a dozen years, you've grown. How many members do you have now?
Right now, we got about 620.
And it started with about a dozen people.
Well, a dozen people, a handful of people sending out literature. And like I say, we all threw $20 in for postage and stamps,
Now, this is primarily in the Straten area.
Well, we got members as far as Eagle River. We got members from Minneapolis. But a lot of times these are people that were local, but they moved away. But there's such an interest that they still come all the way back, or they spend a weekend, or they make a week of it sometimes for vacation, just to come to our banquet.
And the concentration is on the Wolf River, which begins way up north. I've seen it in Langlade County. You indicated it starts even further up than that.
At Pine Lake, up at High Elch.
And as we know, it comes all the way down to Lake Poygan, and eventually empties into Lake Winnebago, and then goes back, joining the Fox and Wolf to go into Green Bay. So
correct.
It's a long waterway, especially with all the crooks and turns.
Yeah.
And it's a trout stream way up north.
Correct.
Describe what it is in the Straten area.
Okay, what we have there in Straten is, and I don't like to brag too much, but the DNR will even make mention to that we have one of the best premier spawning areas in the system. Okay, by that I mean it's basically flooded wood areas. That somewhere along the line through the years, the certain cuts, we call it cuts, and that's a term that the walleyes go into spawn. It creates a flow of current, and the walleyes go into spawn. These have silted in, so they need work to get them back to where they are more productive. See. And that's where we come in. And I would say right now, like Spores Marsh, for example, up there, that is one of the premier spawning grounds in the state of Wisconsin for walleyes.
And so it's essential that during the spawning season there be sufficient water so that these spawning walleyes can get into the marshes, spawn, and presumably the product of the spawning can get back out into the river system. And I suppose there's a little bit of a conflict between the interest in the sportsmen who want the fish to spawn and the farmers who want their fields to dry out in a hurry.
That's correct. That's correct. And that, I guess, will relate back to what I said before. A lot of times when we take a dike that's been diked up by a farmer so he could get on the land earlier. As soon as the walleyes are done spawning, okay, we open up those gates again, let the water go up because the fish already have spawned and the fry is on their way back to Lake Winnebago. So we don't have too much trouble working with some of the farmers. In fact, they're very cooperative up there, very cooperative.
Now, this organization is made up entirely of volunteers. You have no paid professionals.
Correct. Nobody is on the payroll at all. No, and a lot of countless hours. A lot of them.
Not only hours, but equipment. It takes money and equipment to do this kind of a project, doesn't it? Where does the equipment come from?
Okay, we let that out in contract. Okay, and most of the people that do the work are some of our big promoters of our club. We call sponsors. Okay, that's where a lot of our work. I think right offhand, I would say probably we got at least a dozen contractors that belong to this club, and we get some major breaks on equipment hours, man hours. A lot of times they'll do a project and they donate all the man hours, just charge it for the equipment, which is a heck of a savings.
Now, the wolf in that particular part of the state is primarily known as a walleye fishery, but there are other kinds of fish. In fact, we keep having people talk about sturgeon, and there's sturgeon in that area too, aren't there?
Very much, very much. One of the better, and if not one of the best spawning areas in the state is what we refer to as Bamboo Bend, which is just located west of Cheyenne, okay? That was a massive undertaking here about, well, we've done it in like 4 different stages, okay? We're sturgeon for tomorrow. The village of Cheyenne, we had some grants that Mr. Ron Brock has been helpful with through the fisheries, the U.S. fisheries. We got that. Yes, that is, and in fact, right now, they are starting to go on the rocks because of the water temperature coming up. And there is people at the village of Straten who keep all these telephone numbers that the people want them to be called because they come from like Minnesota, Iowa, and all over. They take a week's vacation to come up, and this is something we take for granted because we see it every year, you know. But they come up and they just, it's quite a show, and it's free. You know, it's a tremendous show.
Well, there are many other things going on in the Wolf and many things going on with your club benefiting the Wolf for all of us, but we're going to have to take our first break, and when we come back I'm going to talk a little bit about your view of the other people who use the area for enjoying the wildlife, hunters and people who take pictures, watch birds, do some canoeing. It's a wonderful resource, and we'll be right back. I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. We're talking about the wonderful Wolf River and some of the projects that are being done by a group called Shadows on the Wolf. We have a new guest, Arlene Van Straten's best-looking son. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me.
How long have you been working with this particular group?
I've been a volunteer with the club since we began in 1991, 13 years now. I've been on the board of directors for the last 6, and field project director, they call me. Just, I like being out in the bush and getting my hands dirty with these projects.
And there are lots of things going on the Wolf besides people catching walleyes or the projects of making sure that the walleyes can spawn. Besides the sturgeon, those are too well known. But what other kinds of critters could we enjoy if we canoed a section of the Wolf where you are?
Well, the Wolf River by us is basically slow-moving water, no rapids, but very, very little development along the river. From the Shawano Dam downstream, several bridge crossings, Triple C, Highway 156, County F at Lehman, then again Cheyenne. Those are 15 to 18 mile long segments. Like I said, very little development. On any given day, to see ducks and geese, sandhill cranes, herons, beavers on the shoreline, muskrats, otters. It's pretty popular in the summer months because it is slower water. Not too much problem with canoes being able to navigate, and we don't have a lot of big boat traffic, so if somebody does want to come up and take a canoe ride, it's very enjoyable, very peaceful, and you are going to see wildlife. There's deer, there's turkeys, there's, you know, every kind of wildlife you can imagine up there, that especially in the summer months when things are greening up. They get into the river bottoms more.
And there are lots of twists and turns on that river, and it goes through little bayous, and it actually goes through about a dozen lakes on its trip down here to Oshkosh. And so there are places for northern fishing, panfish fishing, and perch and other kinds of activities.
Oh, yes. We got a lot of different places to fish, some off the shore, some, like I said, you take a canoe and go into these backwaters, into the bayous. People typically cast for walleyes or northerns in the river, but the panfish are more in the bayous, in the slack water. And if you like to fish there's something there for you to fish. The bass along the rock bars, the holes for the walleyes and stuff in the summer, pan fishing. Like I said, you can see the ducks and the geese, especially in the springtime now. They're really out there in the hundreds, literally.
And besides these bridges that cross the river, there are accesses for people to put their boats and canoes in. In fact, that's one of the things that your group has been benefiting all of us in terms of providing access. Why don't you talk about some of the projects this group has done?
Just recently, we completed a couple boat landings right in the Straten area that were pretty primitive landings, gravel-based and hard to get in and out of, and we actually re-sloped them and paved them so that if you got a power boat, easy to get in, and yet, easy for shore landing. If you have a canoe or something, there's private accesses along the river if you'd happen to know a landowner. If not, most of the landings we work on are public. For instance, from Straten up to Lehman, the next bridge, it's 9 miles by road and it's 19 by river.
So it's an afternoon trip.
Oh, it's all of an afternoon, yep. And some of the upriver pieces there, like from Triple C to 156, that would take you all day if you're going to fish it, literally dark to dark. So there's adventure out there, just taking a 15-mile section of river and enjoying it.
Well, tell us about some of these projects that you're working on now. It was mentioned in the initial segment that you've been doing some cuttings to allow the water to get back in the marshes and improve the breeding for the walleyes. But it's not just the walleyes, is it?
It's not just the walleyes. One project in particular that it's an ongoing concern on the Wolf River water property north of Straten, that was completely diked off in 1967. They closed the marsh. There was no water flow. 3 years ago, we actually dug out sections of the dike, lowered them about 3 feet. So when we get high water conditions in the spring, the water goes right through the marshes. We've seen walleyes in there literally in the thousands in the 3 years that we've had that marsh open. Since that time, we've seen a marked increase in muskrats. Before these dikes were out, it was dead water, nothing really lived in it. Now the muskrats are in. The muskrats and the ducks, because of the flowing water, more stuff for them to eat. So by opening a marsh for our walleyes, we actually create better duck habitat, better small game habitat. A lot of different things are utilizing these same marshes.
And you're putting it back much more similar to what it was before it was screwed up.
Before the dikes in the 60s, yeah. And that would be my personal goal as a field project here, manager, to try to get the marshes back the way they were when I was a youngster. And I can remember counting 10,000 walleyes on a little float through a marsh when I was a kid. Nowadays, if you see 1,000, you did pretty good. So we got a long way to go yet on our work.
But it is progress, and obviously you've got a lot of people volunteering their time to do the planning, raise the money so that you can make these contracts for the equipment and follow through. I see pictures, and our viewers are going to be seeing pictures of people out there getting their hands dirty and their butt wet.
Oh yes, some of these projects are fairly simple and some of them are pretty organized. We have actually had to build temporary roads into the marshes in the winter to be able to access it with the equipments and the concrete trucks to do some of these projects, and then remove the road when we come out. So it might take 2 weeks to set up to do a one-day project.
And of course, there's a certain amount of government red tape as well. There should be to get the permits necessary to do that. We don't want to give anybody the impression that they can just borrow a backhoe or drag line and go out and dig a hole in a waterway. It's a little more complex than that.
Oh yes, all these projects that we're doing on the river are done with approved plans from the DNR and completely permitted. They permit the materials, the type of projects, the areas they can be done, and they have to be built according to plan. They are inspected, and if we don't do it right, we won't get to do it again. So we try and do it right the first time.
Well, not only that, there's certainly some penalties that we don't want anybody to have to pay if you take a shortcut. It's got to be done by the procedure required by the law, and it benefits all of us to have access to the waterway, to have the fish back spawning and reproducing like they used to have the water cleaned up, and I know that you've got more projects that are ongoing than the couple you've mentioned, but we're going to have to take our second break, and we'll come back and finish up with some of those projects, and maybe we can encourage some people to get on board and put their shoulder to the wheel a little bit and have even more people participating in the near future.
That would be wonderful.
We'll be right back. We're back with It's Your Environment, and Denny Conradt is back on the show. All of this requires thousands of hours of work by people in your group, Shadows on the Wolf, but it also takes some money. How much money are we talking about this group raises and uses for the benefit of the wolf?
Well, first, George, I guess I'd like to mention that with our 13th banquet, which we, like I said before, we just completed the first part of March, to date, on those 13 banquets, we have raised close to $440,000, okay? And just for a quick moment, if somebody had told me in '91 when we were organizing with these 12 people, again, that threw this $20 in, and we said that in 12 years or 13 years, we've raised just about $500,000, you know what I would have told them, okay? But, okay, out of that amount that we raised, $440,000, to date we have spent roughly $390,000 on various projects in the area. And that's like a 50-mile radius, too.
And you must have an annual banquet to raise this money.
That's correct. That's the only fundraiser we have, that one. Yep.
And people do contribute, however. They contribute some money on some occasions, contribute a lot of labor. And before we get finished with this show, we're going to ask that you give a phone number where people can call in, because this is an amazing group, and I think many people will want to participate. In fact, do you have a number off the tip of your tongue that you
Sure.
give us?
They can contact our membership chairman, which is Hayes Demo. His number is area code 715-752-3600. And I'll also give you another number that he probably wishes I want, but it's going to be 715-752-3344. That's his place of business. You can get a hold of him at either one.
Excellent.
You bet.
And that's a good way to get more people interested in what you're doing and contributing and participating, because this is really worthwhile. Just to give an idea how worthwhile it is, I'd like you to go through some of the projects that this amazing group has already done and is still doing.
Okay. I guess maybe we got numerous projects that we have done, but just a few that I'd like to mention. For example, a few years ago when the state outlawed these plywood backboards for ambulances in 9/11 or 911 emergencies, we purchased the new fiberglass, which were approved by the state, and handed those out, and I believe like they're about $400 a piece at that time. And we gave those to the communities of Clintonville, Cheyenne, Black Creek, Marion, Seymour, and Bear Creek. And like Ace Wayne had mentioned before, we're heavy into hunter safety, and we donate all the guns, buy the guns, whatever. We also have a segment of highway that we clean up between Cheyenne and New London. It's roughly 3.5 miles, okay? That is coming up May 1st, the same day that we're going to be seeing this show. And we have a big turnout for that. We also have what we call a river cleanup every spring. And if you've been on the river different times, you'll see where people throw out pop cans. There's an old minnow bucket floating or whatever. Okay, we cover 33 miles of river, all the way from Lehman by Demos, all the way to Stevensville, just about to Hortonville, 33 miles. And we have possibly, I'm going to say last year we had, there's 2 to a boat, and we probably had 30 boats. And they go, and we meet at a Pacific area, and then we go in stages. Okay, so you go this far, and that's where the next one took off, and etc. You know, so, and then after that, we give each one a little gift, like a insulated coffee mug that says Shadows on it, and then we take them to have a little hamburger and a couple pops and stuff like that. And it's a fun day, more or less, too. And then we're also heavy into the handicap. Okay. Whenever I see somebody in a wheelchair, okay, I don't think that I have too many aches and pains in the morning when I get up, although I do have some arthritis, I guess, like you do, George, but we heavy into handicap. We built a handicap fishing dock, which is wheelchair accessible and everything, Highway 54 and 76, okay, right west of Cheyenne, okay, and we stuck close to 10,000 into that, okay, and in '96, if you can remember, we had a problem up north with so much snow that the deer were starving out. Now, being from Cheyenne, and it's pretty heavily cropped there with cabbage, okay, we donated a semi-load of cabbage to the Crandon area, and the following year to Mercer area, Mercer, Wisconsin. And besides that, we donated $1,000 for whatever way they could use it, you know, as the most useful way of doing it, see? So,
You've also
Yeah.
bought some land and donated it to the community, didn't you?
That's correct. We bought 26 and a half, or 36 and a half, I'm sorry, 36 and a half acres within the village of Straten, and then we deeded it back to the village of Straten, and they built a rifle range there, which now is pretty much complete after 5 years. I mean, it was done in stages because it's kind of expensive too to get that done. And we have a 500-meter range there, and there's only one other one that we know of in the state, and that's at Camp McCoy. And then the old rifle range, which was a kind of a small version or paperweight version of what they got now, that was made into a state-of-the-art archery range, elevated platform to shoot from, and it's just like being in the woods, I guess, you know. So, and we got figures, deer figures, bear, all this and that to shoot at, and those are changed each fall, new, and people up there to help them, whatever. So.
And these projects are ongoing. I'm sure you have plans for this year, for the next year, and other improvements that if you get the resources, get enough members pushing and helping, you intend to keep doing this.
Correct, correct. You know, the thing about it is, too, with the permit process the way it is now, we're probably 2 to 3 years into planning, okay? This is going to be a possibility because the permit process is pretty lengthy now, you know, and you're talking 3 months for approval, if in fact you get the approval. So you have to have something going all the time in order to be up with the game, you know. The thing about it is, too, we mentioned before about how much money we raised. And many people, we say, well, because we know other clubs, I belong to other organizations, lots of them, and they don't, some of them, in a way, don't come close to what we raise. And we asked our members, well, you know, what do you think the success is? It isn't just although to the board of directors we do a lot of work, they can see where the money is spent. So, and that's a big thing.
And of course, there's got to be a lot of pride and enthusiasm to get these volunteers. They care about this great river. There are thousands of people who care about the Fox-Wolf Basin here because it's so important to this particular area. We're so fortunate to live here. Denny, we're out of time. Okay. I appreciate you and a couple of the other members of this great club coming here and telling us about Shadows on the Wolf. Keep up the good work for all of us.
Thank you, George.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In closing, I'd like to again thank Arlene Van Straten for tipping us off to the group called Shadows on the Wolf, an impressive group that began with 12 people, each throwing $20 into the pot, writing 200 letters, and deciding that they were going to follow through with focus on their idea of improving the wolf. It's gone well beyond improving the wolf, but the wolf is continuing to be improved by this group, and I hope many of you see fit to join it. What also is impressive is a reminder of how important volunteers are in this country. You know, most of the things that are done by governments in other countries are done by volunteers, people who have a concern, a caring, and a willingness to perform public service for all of us. You take most of your charitable organizations have 1 or 2 paid professionals and then hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers. They couldn't possibly survive an hour without the volunteers. Keep that in mind. Volunteering, service, is the price we all must pay for the time we spend. I admire these volunteers and hope you join them. I'm George Curtis.